to invite Professor Anju Agarwal to moderate this session on developmental examination. Madam has been our teacher and she is a professor of pediatrics at the University College of Medical Science in Delhi. Over to you, Dr. Anju, to moderate the session.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik. I thank the Association of Child Neurology for giving me this opportunity to interact with the youngsters on this very important topic of developmental examination. We are always at a loss as to how to examine a child properly as far as the development is concerned, whether it is normal or abnormal, or is it within the limits, or you have to re-examine the child to make the child say having a developmental delay or not having a developmental delay. And Dr. Sharmila Mukherjee, who's a professor of pediatrics at Lady Hardinge Medical College, will be dealing with it. So over to Dr. Sharmila.
Good evening, everybody. I thank the Association of Child Neurology for giving me this opportunity. And I thank Dr. Anju for being our moderator this evening. Today's topic is developmental examination. And traditionally, whenever we talk about development, we mean a child who is under 5 years of age. Surprisingly, developmental examination, though it is a pretty important aspect of any clinical examination, is not given that much importance by the pediatric residents and students. And I offer a few arguments why it is important. So I'll start the session with this question, which is, why is a developmental examination important? I hope I'm audible to everybody. Dr. Anju, is it fine? Okay. So
you're audible, Dr. Sharmila, you're audible.
Fine. Thank you, ma'am.
Continue.
So from a clinician's point of view, a developmental examination is important because we often find caregivers underreporting or overreporting the developmental abilities of their children. And by doing a developmental examination, you can cross-check whether the milestones that the parents have reported are correct or not. Secondly, there are certain aspects of an examination like detection of subtle variations or asymmetry in tone, movements, and posture that are not picked up by parents and are not captured by psychometric tests. So a developmental examination can pick these up and result in early intervention with a better prognosis. Also, it's a part and parcel of any developmental assessment. As you know, a developmental examination follows a developmental history and elicitation of developmental milestones, and it is followed by clinical synthesis and arriving at a clinical diagnosis. A developmental examination is also a very important part of a neurological examination, and when both are clubbed together, it's known as an extended neurological examination. It allows assessment of functional impairment and thus helps in planning holistic intervention. And in children under 5 with locomotor impairment, it can be used for disability certification. And as a faculty member of pediatrics, I would say knowing how to do a good developmental examination is an essential competency for any pediatric resident. But I know that won't cut much with you guys. What is important for you is from the perspective of a student. So these are the arguments that I offer. As a student, as you know, even in the undergrad level, developmental history is mandatory in all pediatric case presentations, irrespective of the system that is involved. And that holds true for any pediatric postgraduate as well. If you get a child with suspected neurological disorder or a neurodevelopmental disorder, a dysmorphic or a clinical condition which is known to be associated with developmental delay and regression, a child who has visual or hearing impairment, a child who is brought with parental concerns regarding developmental behavior, a child who is at high risk for developmental delay because he has screened positive on a screening test for development, or is a NICU graduate, or has single or multiple risk factors which are known to have an adverse influence on the developmental trajectory. In all these situations, a clinical developmental assessment must be done. And the icing on the cake, irrespective of whatever child you have got as an exam case, it is the prerogative of the examiner to ask you to do a developmental assessment, even in a typically developing child who has come for, say, a hepatic condition or some other thing, some other condition, just so that he can assess your developmental skills. So in a nutshell, you must know how to do a developmental history and a developmental examination. So proceeding further, I have planned this session before I tell you about how I'm going to proceed with the procession, I need to tell you about what you need to know and what you should be able to do for a developmental examination. You have been doing development since undergrad level. So as a postgraduate student, you must have thorough knowledge of development, about the appearance of developmental milestones, about how development, play, and behavior progresses in a typically developing child. You must have good observation skills so that you can assess how well a child is performing a task. And you should be able to multitask. When I talk about multitasking, I mean that if you're assessing gross motor, you must also simultaneously assess the social domain and the language domain and focal and the fine motor domains that occur simultaneously. You have to have good communication skills to enable you to conduct the parental interview, establish rapport, and be able to get the child to perform. So as a pediatric student, as a pediatric resident, you have to have higher level skills for cognition. That is, you should be able to convince the examiner that you know how to arrive at a synthesized information and arrive at a diagnosis. You need to have the psychomotor abilities to be able to perform and elicit the skills from the child you're evaluating. And you need to have good communication and attitude, the way you behave. These three are essential skills that you as a student and as an examiner of the child need to have. So in this session, what we're going to do is we're going to talk first about the conditions and strategies used in a developmental examination. Then we will follow through the process of the examination going in a domain-wise fashion. And the format will be similar for all the domains. We'll be talking about the typical developmental pattern, the process of evaluation, and the abnormalities that are identified for each domain. This will be done with the help of videos of both typically and atypically developing children. I'll also have some self-assessment exercises and 2 poll questions which I would want you to answer. At this point, I would like you to keep some paper and a pen or pencil at hand, because in the self-assessment exercises, I'll be asking you to write down your observations of what skills you see the child performing in the videos. And at the end, I'll briefly be talking about how you synthesize all the information that you have got from a clinical examination of development. So there are 2 types of developmental assessment. The first is a clinical assessment that is performed by clinicians. It can be structured like the Hammersmith Infant Neurological Examination, which along with neurological components also has motor milestones as well as a section on behavior. You can have an unstructured examination in which there are no scorings and there's no norms, but it gives you invaluable clinical information. The steps to this unstructured bedside evaluation is elicitation of history pertinent to development, followed by the developmental examination, synthesis of information from both these components, interpretation, and arriving at a clinical diagnosis. And if there is an abnormal pattern of delay, then being able to proceed further. I'd like to stop here and mention that you must have learned in your undergrad level or even in your postgrad that there are 3 abnormal patterns of delay: predominantly motor delay, predominantly speech and language delay, and global developmental delay when 2 or more domains are affected. And if the child you are evaluating has any of these abnormal patterns, it will help you plan investigations. It will help you come to a clinical diagnosis and probable etiological diagnosis. And the second type of developmental assessment is a psychometric assessment. This is done by a trained pediatrician or a developmental pediatrician or a clinical psychologist. And here the child is evaluated either by developmental screening tools, which can identify children who are at high risk for developmental delay, which I had mentioned earlier, or And children who screen positive in these developmental screening tools are assessed by developmental diagnostic tools that can compute developmental quotient or developmental age. And if these quotients or the age is inappropriate for the chronological age, the child is categorized as typical developing or atypical developing. I'll just mention here that we no longer say normal or abnormal development because that has a negative connotation. So I'd like you to get used to this nomenclature of typically developing and atypically developing. And in addition, we can also assess the severity of the delay, and it also identifies the strengths and weaknesses in each of the domains, which helps in planning and monitoring intervention. So this session is going to be focusing on basically the unstructured examination, and we'll briefly be touching upon the history because the history is the starting point of any developmental examination. It directs the course of your examination. I'm not going to go into the depths, but in a developmental history, what you should have done is that you should have elicited parental concerns regarding each developmental domain, asked about any comorbid condition, and arrived at an estimate of the current functioning in each of the developmental domains based on your developmental milestones that has been given by the parent. So in what you're trying to do here is that you're defining the clinical phenotype of the developmental and behavioral profile. You also need to know what the impact of the developmental delay is on the activities of daily living, and whether the child is participating in social and pre-academic activities, because that gives you an idea of the functional impairment which the delay is giving rise to. You need to, from the developmental milestones, assess whether there is a plateau, whether there is a delay or a regression, and if that is present, the onset, the domains of the developmental domains that are involved, as well as the pattern of the developmental involvement, which I talked about earlier. I'll repeat: predominantly motor delay, predominantly speech and language delay, and global developmental delay. It's sometimes possible to figure out what the timing and the nature of the insult was from the history as well as the probable underlying etiology, which may or may not be possible depending upon what clinical clues you have got in the history. And it is always important to elicit the risk and protective factors, biological, psychosocial, or environmental, which can adversely affect the developmental trajectory, and as well as the intervention which you plan for the child, if they are not modified. Now, traditionally, developmental examination is tailored according to the estimated age of the child, and remember that you must use the corrected age in any child born preterm till the age of 24 months. And usually we club it as the examination of a newborn, the examination of a young infant, the examination of an older infant, the developmental examination of a toddler and a preschooler. It's an exhaustive topic, and in the given limited time, what I am going to do is that I'm going to categorize them as, I'll not be dealing with the neonatal evaluation, but children beyond the neonatal period within 12 months, infants, and 1 to 5 years. And talking about the settings and strategies, there are certain do's and don'ts. You have to have a comfortable environment for the parent as well as the child with minimal distractors. You start establishing rapport with the child while you're taking history from the mother. The child, if the child is a young infant, he will probably be in the mother's lap. And while you're talking with the mother, you can start smiling at the child, offering him toys and objects while you are still maintaining eye contact with the mother. You must remember to be very polite and nice to the mother, be very friendly so that you establish rapport, because the child is going to take cues from the kind of relationship you're establishing with the mom. If you raise your voice or you make a kind of a inappropriate expression, the child picks up cues and may not be forthcoming when you try to establish rapport with the child himself. Always start with non-invasive examination. Keep the invasive parts of the examination to the last. The procedure of examination can be observation in the lab while you're taking history, examination in the lab again while you're taking history, because you can assess the grasp and the reach by offering him toys while talking with the mother. Once the history is complete, you can shift the examination to the table if it's a young child. the examining bed if it's an older child, and you can do your observation and examination there. If it's a child who is crawling and an infant, you can do the observation and examination, the subsequent observation and examination on you must remember that the child should not be sick. You should not do an examination just before or just after meals or during the time when the child usually takes a nap. You must also remember not to give toffees or chocolates to a young infant which may be a choking hazard and may be inappropriate for a 5-monther who should not be given any other feeds apart from exclusive breastfeeding. These are small things that are very important and which an examiner notes. Also, you must remember that if a child does not perform a certain skill, that does not necessarily mean that it's an inability, and we'll be talking about this later. But suppose in your clinical evaluation, you find that the child is not evaluating. Another important method of gaining clinical information is by asking the mother to make home videos. And especially now in this current scenario of COVID, when you have to wear all the protective gear, it's very intimidating to a child. They feel threatened and they feel scared. In fact, you know that pediatricians themselves are not supposed to wear white coats. And here you're wearing such an alien kind of a suit. It's a little difficult to get kids to do things. So home videos in that setting will probably have a more important role now. The information should be from multiple sources as well as across settings, which means that you should know what the child is doing at home, in the playground setting, if the child is going to such an institute. Now, the components of an examination or developmental examination include anthropometry and general physical examination, a neurological examination, following which you do the developmental assessment. This is examination of the gross motor and fine motor domain, the social domain, the communication domain, which includes expressive and receptive verbal as well as non-verbal language. You always must do a vision and a hearing assessment, and the play and the behavior and the overall cognition. Now, this is what we're going to be focusing on in today's session. I'll also just like to mention here that adaptive function is another domain that often you come across, and this is nothing but basically all the skills from every domain which a child requires for daily functioning and activities of daily living. And adaptive function is something which you usually cannot assess in a clinical setting because it may not be appropriate for you to ask the mother to feed the child or to get him to dress or undress or groom himself in the clinical setting. And these are again are instances or situations which you can get the information very nicely from home videos. So as I mentioned earlier, we have probably already estimated the domain-wise developmental age from the milestones, and that is our starting point. Now, when we assess the child, do the evaluation, the focus changes, the focus and the emphasis on the domains kind of changes according to the age of the child. In a younger child, the focus is more on gross motor, and as the child becomes older, the emphasis and the history and the examination from the social, communication, play, behavior, and cognition increases. And vision and hearing has to be done for every child, irrespective of age. And apart from assessing the skills, the psychomotor skills, it is also important to ask. Now, ask does not mean the developmental milestones. Ask means that when you're eliciting a skill, you're doing suppose you're asking the child you're getting the child to walk. You can ask the mother that how does this child walk in this kind of a situation? So you're kind of broadening the phenotype that you're seeing in front of you. So it's important just not to see whether a child can perform a skill or not. What is important is to see how well the child is performing it and how often the child is doing it at home. And as I mentioned earlier, you must be alert, you must register everything. And if you're evaluating the gross motor domain and the child does something related to the social or the language domain, just note it alongside. At the end, record everything in a systematic fashion according to the various domains, and then synthesizes, which I will be talking about at the end. So we first start with the first domain, which is the gross motor domain. Now, as you all know, gross motor domain is related to skills pertaining to posture and ambulation, which is basically the large muscles, the maturation of the central nervous system myelination and the control and coordination of large muscles of the neck, the head, the neck, the trunk, the legs. And you also know that neonatal reflexes have to be lost, supportive reflexes appear, and the flexor tone of limbs of a young infant starts to decrease, and the extensor tone of the trunk starts to increase. And there's gradually improving postural stability in a cephalocaudal direction that proceeds throughout infancy. And these gross motor milestones are not nothing new, and you know about all of them, but I'm going to mention just one milestone over here, which I often find students getting confused with, and that is skipping. We traditionally say jump, hop, skip, which is 2, 3, and 4 years. 2 years jumping, hopping 3 years, and skipping 4 years. So sorry, jumping 3, hopping 4, and skipping 5. Now here, when we talk about skipping, we're not talking about using the rope to skip. We're talking about what this young lady is doing in this video. So I'm sure you've seen children doing this. So this is what we mean when we talk about skipping in terms of development. During a gross motor examination, there are various aspects that have to be done. So for an infant, the first thing is to observe the quality of spontaneous skills, the movements, and posture. So here you can see 2 videos, and what I want you to do is take your pen and paper out and write down all the observations that you see in both the videos, and then we'll match your answers with ours. Great. I hope you've written down your observations. So let me show you what we observed. The child gets up holding the mother's arms. The child can crawl. She can sit without support. She can pivot without overbalancing. She can reach up and pick up an object. She can go into the standing position from a crawl. She stands holding on to the table with support. We don't know whether she can cruise or not because that's not included in the video. But from the way she's standing with support, it is definitely obvious that the child cannot stand independently. So now we come to the next task, and that is, what is the gross motor developmental age for this child? Now here, I'd like to, you have a lot of information. Now you have to apply your clinical reasoning. So we have to arrive at a range, that the range of the developmental age of the gross motor skills is, say, from X months to Y months. So how do we figure that out? We look at the highest skill that the child can do. So this child can pivot without overbalancing, which comes at around 11 months, and can stand with support, which comes at around 10 months. So that means that the lower limit is around 11 months, and we know that the child cannot stand independently. So the developmental age is around 11 to 12 months. And this is the way you proceed with determining the developmental age for every single domain based on the highest skill that of the next sequential milestone. So I'm sorry. The next part of the gross motor examination of an infant is measuring the Amiel-Tyson angles. Now, these are angles which you're all familiar with and which differ according to the age of the child. And I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritties of these due to restricted time, but there are very good videos on YouTube, and I advise you to go through them to get the alongside with your text so that you learn how to do these appropriately, but it's an important part of any developmental examination. The next component is examining the tone, the movement and posture of the child by developmental maneuvers. And this is something which you have been taught in the undergrad days, but I'm going to make it a little more structured, and I'm going to teach you something more because now you are postgraduates. So you are all familiar with the supine position, pull to sit, held sitting, held standing, axillary suspension, ventral suspension, and prone. In the supine position, what you're supposed to look at is the child's facial expressions, whether the hands are fisted or not, whether the child is moving his arms and legs symmetrically, is the movement normal, is there any identifiable abnormality in the tone, and you also assess the hearing and the vision in this position. You can also assess the reflexes and the neonatal reflexes in this position. Then in pull to sit, you look at the control of the head. You look at the rounding of the back. You can see when you pull this, when you're in the process of pulling the child, you can see whether you can feel whether the child is having a sense of resistance. There is something called as flexospasm in the popliteal angle. I'll be coming to that a little later. In the held sitting position, again, you look at the quality of the head control and the rounding of the back, and you can give him a little shake to see whether the neck writing reflex has developed. In held standing, what you see is whether the child has no weight bearing, partial weight bearing, complete weight bearing, or does he bounce on the surface. In axillary suspension, you can see whether the child has hypertonicity, scissoring, or the dorsiflexion at the angles of the feet, or in the other extreme, whether the child is hypertonic and appears to be slipping through your fingers. In ventral suspension, you look at the alignment of the head with the trunk and see whether the head is above the plane of the body, at the level of the plane, or below the plane, and also see the relative extension and flexion of the limbs in conjunction to the body. It's also the position where you can check for the parachute reflex in an older child. And in a prone position, you can see whether the chin is on the surface, whether the chin is lifted, whether the face is less than 45 degrees, between 45 to 90 degrees, or above 90 degrees. You can see whether the upper chest is lifted or not, the lower chest, whether the weight bearing is on the forearms or on the semi-extended arms or fully extended arms. You also look at the pelvis, whether it is flat or whether it is raised. An important aspect which is often missed is the relative is the other findings that you can find in the lower limb, especially in a child who has evolving cerebral palsy. There is the asymmetry of tone becomes very evident in the prone position. Now, we have put this in the circular fashion because we call this the 180 degrees flip. You notice here we're starting in the supine position, from supine, so horizontal to vertical sitting, to vertical standing, to vertical suspension. Then we turn him over, he becomes a horizontal suspension, and then we bring him down to the surface and it becomes prone. So this is called a 180 degree flip. So from a horizontal, you turn over and you go back to another horizontal. And this is because it's a very smooth transition. You don't keep on flipping the child as if you're cooking a roti on a griddle. It's very comfortable for the child. The child doesn't cry or become cranky, and you get to do all your observations in a very nice way. So I'll give you a demonstration of this. And at the end of this video, I would like you to answer 2 questions. What is the gross motor developmental age of this infant? And are there any abnormalities in the examination? So I'll be running through the video twice. Why twice? The first time I want you to focus on the way I'm doing the procedure to see the way I'm doing it. I'm doing the 180 degree flip. And in the second run through, I want you to document all the findings that you have observed under the individual categories of the positions. So now focus on the way I'm doing it. Okay. So from the supine, pull to sit, held sitting, give him a little shake, bring him up, held standing, lift it and put him down to see whether there's weight bearing, talking with him at the same time to try to elicit social responses, lifted him up, axillary suspension, bringing him horizontal, ventral suspension, and now gradually bringing him down, being careful of the splint on his arm, to prone position. So it takes within a minute or 1.5 minutes, everything is done. And here I'm trying to encourage him to lift his chest a little higher by giving him stimuli. So I'll run through the video again, and now I want you to document all your observations in this given way, which is each domain, the description of your observations, and according to what you have observed, what you think the developmental age is for that particular position, or if there are any abnormalities. Because again, these are things that as a pediatric resident you should know, and this information is available in Nelson as well as Ellingworth and any other standard textbook. So I'm not going into the details of what a child can do at what age in each of these positions. You're expected to know that. Right now I want you to write what you see. So we're starting from here. So I hope you have written your findings. So let's see what our findings are. In supine, there's not enough information. I started from supine, but we didn't focus on the child in the supine position. So we can't say anything about the last column. In pull to sit, there was a slight head lag, but the back was straight. So this comes to around 3 to 3.5 months. In held sitting, the back was straight. The head was held, but it bobbed a bit. And that was at the terminal end of the pulling to sit, as well as when we were looking at the righting reflex of the neck. So that is around 4 to 4.5 months. In held standing, there is, I mean, I know it's not apparent, but since I did the examination, I'm telling you, and you'll have to take my word for it. There was a little more than partial weight bearing, but not full weight bearing on both the legs, which were not completely extended as it should have been. There was no bouncing. And there seemed to be a slight dorsiflexion angle, excessive dorsiflexion in the left ankle. So this is roughly between 4 to 4.5 months. In axillary suspension, there was no overt scissoring, but there again was slight dorsiflexion of both the bilateral ankles. So here the suspicion of abnormality kind of gets reinforced. In ventral suspension, the head was above the plane, but the head is above the plane in a 12 weeker. And here in the other domains, we're coming to around 3.5 to 4 months. So in a 3.5 to 4, more elevated. It wasn't as much as it was expected. The upper limbs were extended, but the lower limbs were not visible because I was blocking the view. In the prone, the face was 45 to 90 degrees. You can see over here, the upper chest is not lifted. The weight is on the forearm. The pelvis is flat. There is a slight asymmetry of the leg position. This should be rechecked again when we evaluate the child. And again, there is a discordance of findings. When the face is 45 to 90 degrees, here in this situation, the upper chest should have been lifted. So there is discordant findings. So this discordant findings and a slight hint of some tone abnormality leads us to perform the popliteal, to see whether there is a popliteal spasm. And for this, again, a very good description is given. I'd like you to read the chapter of neurological findings in a child with cerebral palsy or involving cerebral palsy in Illingworth, and you'll know what I'm talking about the popliteal spasms. So the gross motor developmental age here is somewhere roughly between 3.5 and 4 months. And if I ask you whether the exam is normal or abnormal, I would say that there are abnormalities in the examination of the 180 degrees flip. And I hope you were able to appreciate the way I did it. And remember, this is a skill. So it appears very nice and smooth the way I'm doing it, but I have years of practice. So you have to practice something. Again, for attaining mastery in any skill, you have to practice. Without practice, it's not going to come. However many theory lectures or webinars you attend. So going back to the gross motor examination of the infant, and my cursor seems to have got stuck. Okay, so now after we do the 180 degrees flip, what are we supposed to do next? We're also supposed to assess the neonatal and protective reflexes. And remember what I said, the neonatal reflexes, the writing reflex, the neonatal reflexes are in the supine position. The neck writing is when you're doing the held sitting, and the parachute is when it's in the ventral suspension. So these should all be performed simultaneously while you're doing the 180 degrees flip. So abnormalities are, if we talk about the motor milestones, no head control by 6 months, no independent sitting by 12 months, deviant crawling patterns, age inappropriate angles in the Amiel Tyson evaluation, fisting for tone, if there's persistent fisting beyond 12 weeks, any asymmetry or abnormality in the tone, movement or posture, persistence of neonatal reflexes beyond 6 months. Okay, so now we go to the gross motor examination of a child between 1 to 5 years. Now here again you're using an open surface, and even should be even, and if you have a toddler who's just learned to walk, it should be carpeted so that if the child falls he will not hurt himself. If it's an older child, the steps with you should have access to steps with railing. Here you assess various gross motor skills according to the, starting with the skill that you expect from your expected developmental age. And here, this is the first poll question. I'd like you to look at the video in this child and answer this poll question. And I hope you know how to answer the poll questions. This is the video. So this is the poll question, and I'm waiting for your answer. So I am ending the polling right now, and the correct answer is 20 months. So I know the most number of responses were in 24 months, but the thing is that kicking
Dr. Sharmila, we can't hear you. Dr. Sharmila, we cannot hear you. Can you check your mic again? Can you hear me, Dr. Sharmila? We seem to have lost contact with Dr. Sharmila right now. So by the time Dr. Sharmila joins us again, there were some good things she has told us about the tone abnormalities. Only thing with the tone abnormalities, they are an indicator for cerebral palsy, but they may be transient in an infant. So you have to follow up such a child for these tone abnormalities. Secondly, all these tone abnormalities, you have to correlate with the other physical findings, the weight of the child, the head circumference of the child, and not make the child just on one tone abnormality. You cannot label a child a high risk for cerebral palsy. These things should be noted down and the child should be followed up. Another important point which Dr. Sharmila had made was that the psychometric tests, which are for developmental assessment, should be done by a trained person or a psychologist. Regarding the questions, There was a question about whether the IV in the hand would affect the observation or lifting up of the chin of the child. The child was looking quite healthy. There was an IV in the head, maybe for antibiotics. In such a case, I don't think it will affect the lifting of the chin of the child. Till Dr. Sharmila joins back again.
Dr. Sharmila has just lost the connection. She'll join back. Anju ma'am, Dr. Sharmila has just lost the connection. She'll just join back.
Okay. When
Meanwhile,
are you able to hear me?
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'll answer some of the questions by that time.
You can take up, there are many students who have raised their hands. You can allow them to talk and take up such questions also.
Okay. There's a question, till what age we should mention primitive reflexes in children with cerebral palsy, 1 year or 6 months corrected age? See, primitive reflexes in a child of cerebral palsy may persist even longer. Sometimes the grass reflex may persist up till 2 to 3 years of age. So you have to check the primitive reflexes and see where, right, rooting, sucking, grass reflex, asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. These are the common reflexes you should see in all children, and whether they are present or not. Hand-to-hand transfer occurs at 7 months of age. Regarding the red flag signs and gross motor milestones, if the child is not able to sit independently by 8 months, if the child is not able to walk by 1.5 months, 1.5 years. Another question is, till what age should insult to the brain be considered as a cause of cerebral palsy? Any reference for that answer? See, the definition says insult to a developing brain. Initially, developing brain for the purpose of registry or purpose of counting cerebral palsy in the country was considered till 5 years of age, and most of the brain development occurs by 2 years of age. So any prenatal and postnatal interval till 2 years of age will be a cause of cerebral palsy, but country-wise registries may consider this age as 5 years. Any other questions?
Dr. Anju?
Yeah, you're there? So
Yeah,
you
I'm
can
here.
Yeah, continue.
Can you just tell me where I left off? Because I continued without realizing that I'd been cut off.
I think you had shown that videos, and then you conducted the poll, and in the poll your answer was 20 months, though most of us answered it as 24 months. So I don't think one can really pinpoint for 2 to 3 months in a video like
Definitely,
that.
I agree with you.
So you just explain that point again and continue from there.
Okay. This again is So we now arrive at the gross motor examination of a child between 1 to 5 years. And
Dr. Sharmila, can you put it on slideshow mode, because we are just able to.
Sure. Okay. So we looked at, as Dr. Anju very correctly said, that in the video is a small screenshot. It will be very difficult for you to assess the final subtle nuances. But what the message here is that what you need to do is that you don't just see whether the child can kick or not, or whether the child can walk or not. You need to see the quality of the walking, whether the child is walking with a narrow base or a broad base, whether he is extending his, wait, one sec. Yeah, whether he's walking with his arms extended, whether he's walking with a broad base, so that is the quality of the walk, the quality of the kick, the quality of the sitting. These are the things that need to be seen, and as well as the frequency. In a slightly older child, you look at the balance, the coordination, and if suppose according to the estimated developmental age, the child is unable to perform that skill, you go to the previous skill, which you know from your knowledge of milestone, and you assess that, and that can give you the rough age. What are the abnormalities in a child who has in a gross motor examination? If the child isn't walking by 18 months, if there's any asymmetry or abnormality in the tone, movements, or posture, if there's age inappropriate performance, if the child displays clumsiness or poor balance, frequent falls, and the extent of support required for ambulation, specifically for a child with cerebral palsy. And if you can do this, then you get a bonus mark in your examination. And this is done by the Gross Motor Functional Classification System, expanded and revised. I'm not going to go into the details. It's available on the net. If you have a child with CP, always do this assessment. It's pretty simple. It's according to the age. Now we come to the second domain, the fine motor domain, which we start with the typical developmental pattern. Now the fine motor domain is the skills that arise from the function and the coordination of small muscles. And a very common mistake which people make is that they start with the first fine motor milestone as with reaching out or the grasp. That is not so. The smallest muscles and the coordination is the eye muscles. So the first fine motor muscle is eye-eye coordination, which is fixation and tracking. This is followed by hand-eye coordination. So you can see over here a child of around 3 to 4 months. If he's put under a baby gym, he will start swatting his hands at the dangling toys. Then comes mouth-eye coordination at around 5 to 6 months. So that is the typical time when you have hands in the midline and the child starts having finger foods by 6 months. And then increasing sophistication of the manipulative power of the hand 6 months onwards. So this is basically now the fine motor skills are an integration of visual perception, postural balance, and motor coordination. And at around 6 months, the depth perception of the child and the hand movements become more sophisticated, and the use of both hands becomes slowly transitions into the use of single hands. And this is how the process of evaluation also continues. You look from 6 months onwards at the quality of the approach and the grasp. You all know that the neonatal palmar grasp is lost at around 5 months or so. It shouldn't persist beyond that. And once that is lost, then the voluntary hand movements and the voluntary hand grasp start. Raking is the approach that a child uses to pick up an object. And this is why it's called a rake, because it resembles the terminal end of a rake, which is a garden implement used for picking up dried leaves. And when the child is a little older, around 8 to 9 months, then the child uses the index finger like this to approach an object. And the palmar grasp is the way a child holds a large object in his palm, and an immature or ulnar palmar grasp is around 6 months, which gradually comes to the center of the palm, and then the mature or the radial is at the radial side of the hand, which comes at 12 months. The maturity of the pincer grasp is another thing that you need to look at. Now here, pincer grasps can be used, as you can see, in both the rows, in large objects as well as in small objects. So first we'll go to the large object. We left the palmar grasp as radial palmar, that gradually becomes radial digital, in which the surfaces of the digital, the volar surface of the fingers are used, and then gradually it becomes to the terminal ends of the volar surfaces till the terminal absolute ends of the digits. And the pincer grasp over here is when it becomes like a pincer like this. You're using the ends of the digits and it's a pincer. This is a mature pincer grasp, which comes by around 12 months. Similarly, for a small pellet, you have initially the child will not be able to grasp it. Then if you follow in the second diagram, the child is being able to hold, but now you need to look at the index finger and the thumb. And in the index finger, look at whether the pellet is being used opposed by the lateral surface or the volar surface. So you can see over here, initially in the immature grasp of the pellet, in the second figure, it's being used by the thumb and the lateral aspect of the finger. Then it's being used by an intermediate between the lateral and the volar aspect, and there's a slight resemblance of a pincer. Then it becomes a little more terminal, and in the end, it again is by using this kind of a pincer grasp. So the evolution of the grasp, as well as the hand manipulative part, as well as the ability to release objects, all this helps in the evolution of exploration of objects and toys. And again, it's very easy to assess. I mean, it's not easy, but when you look at the pictures also, it takes you some time to understand. But when the child does it in front of you, it's done so rapidly that often people get mistaken. And I'll be showing you videos, and I'm pretty sure that there are going to be issues in that as well. But again, the moral of the story is that you have to observe kids, and then you'll be able to assess them. So these are the equipments which are used for fine motor, and you can see here that as the child grows older, from 1 to 3 monther to a 12-monther, the number of equipment also increases. I'll just like to mention here one thing, another don't for an evaluation. If you have a lot of stuff in front of you and in front of the child is going to get distracted. So when you're performing a certain skill, keep only that equipment in front of you. Keep all the other things hidden or behind you so that the child doesn't get distracted. So you'll have to very quickly use that tool or equipment, perform the task, and then coax the child to release that tool, engage him with another tool, and then proceed to the next. And in the last assessment that you do, be ready to accept the fact that whatever toy you use will be taken home by the child, because that is what he will refuse to give it to you. That's a pretty common occurrence. So in fine motor examination of an infant, you have to observe fixation and tracking. Then you try to encourage the infant to reach out for objects, again by using attractive things. So over here we have toys scattered on a carpet, and this is what I was talking about, the raking approach. And the next video is what I want you to have this video is for this is the next poll question, and I want you to look at this. Okay, wait. Look at the video, and the question is that which grasp does the infant display, and the options are given here. And I'll run this twice so that there is no so I'm running it again. Sorry, where is Dr. Kaushik? Are you there? I'm unable to get the second polling question. Okay, sorry. Right. Okay. The answer for this is radial digital. And again, as I said, look at this. It's not just in the palm. It's the digits as well. So the entire digit surface, the palm, the digit surface, and the entire thing is being used. So that's why it's radial digital. Again, as I said, that this is something which is difficult. You will need to go back to the figures. Only they develop this skill. But again, what I meant you to understand was that these are skills that need to be looked at, and that only comes with practice. So if a child is sitting you in the lap or on the surface, you can offer him objects and toys and assess the way he reaches out, the way he grasps, whether he can transfer from one hand to the other, and how does he explore. You can give him one block and then give him a second block and see what he does. You can again assess the grasp by giving him pellets, and you can see whether the child can release a block in the hand. So I want you to look at these videos and tell me what you write down your observations, and we'll discuss. So you already know the age of this child. It's a 10-monther. Now, in a 10-monther, she wouldn't have reached mature pincer grasp. And if you see that here, her pincer grasp is not at the end. It's around here, which is totally appropriate for her age. And here, let's look at what she does over here. And I'm sure all of you will agree that she certainly is a good girl. So let's get back to the examination. So what are the abnormalities in a fine motor examination of an infant? If there's no reach by 6 months, if there's no index finger exploration by 12 months, if there's lack of purposeful exploration by 12 months, and I'd like you to look at these two videos and tell me what your diagnosis is, just based on the fine motor.
Very good. Do wapas do. Sharper.
Here we've immobilized one hand and we're asking him to lift up. So you got one important clue from the first video. Let's look at the second video. Now we've given her pellets. And this child is roughly around 15 months. So what do you think the diagnosis is? Can you write down the answers? And the answer is cerebral palsy, because she's using only one hand, there's immature grasp. So these are the clues. Now we come to the assessment of the fine motor in a 1 to 5 year old child. Now here, remember that there's a lot of overlap with cognitive skills, and this is what we call non-verbal perceptual cognition, which is an integration of visuospatial perception, the way a child perceives an object, plus memory, plus recall. And that is why the activities become increasingly sophisticated: drawing, block construction, and shapes. You can see the equipment is also much more attractive, and this is when you have to be very careful with your stuff. So fine motor examination, you can see here there are block construction and scribbling, and according to the age, the number of blocks that are used for towers, the number of blocks that are used, a gate. So this is a gate, this is a bridge, this is a train without a chimney and with a chimney. And for scribbling, scribbling starts at around 15 to 18 months. 13 to 18 months, and then various figures according to age. So these are things that you need to know by rote memory, so that if you do assess a child, you can say how old the child is. But there is a concept that you need to understand over here. What is the difference between imitating, what is the difference between copying, and what is the difference between performing? Now suppose you draw a line and you draw it in front of the child, and then you tell the child that make this. You're not saying make a line. You're saying make this, and you're showing it in front of him. And the child copies what you have demonstrated to him without knowing that without you telling him that it's a line. That is imitation. Now, if you show him a drawn line, you've already drawn the line, you did not show him how you were drawing the line in front of him, you've shown him a drawn line, and then you tell him make this, again without naming it, and he can do it accurately. That means he can copy. And if you say make a line and he makes the line, that means he is not imitating, he's not copying, he is performing the act. So this is a concept that you need to understand. And I'd like you to tell me the age of this young gentleman. Oh, now let's look at the second video. You can see here in this video that a line has already been drawn for him. He hasn't been shown how to draw this vertical line. And let's see. So he has made the small line where over here you can't, it's over here, you can't see it. I don't know whether you can see it or not, but take my word for it, he has made this line. Over here he has a horizontal line that has been made for him, and he's being asked to draw it. So here you can see that he's not making the horizontal line. And sometimes when you ask a child to make something and the child is unable to do it, he kind of goes back and uses this kind of circular scribbling. It's a normal phenomena. So what is the information that we have so far? We have a child who has made a tower of 8 cubes. He has made a vertical line and not able to make a horizontal line. So the child's age is between 2 to 2.5 years. Okay. Now let's see how old this young lady is.
Anaya, can you please draw this?
So a rectangle has been already made.
Can you draw the rectangle? Very good.
And she has made it. And now in this video, in the copy, the mother has already made the triangle.
Very good.
And she has also made the triangle. And in the third one, she has been, a diamond has been drawn. And she's able to make this the diamond. So she can copy a rectangle, she can copy a triangle, she can copy a diamond. So what is the age of this child?
Anaya, can you please draw
4.5 diamond, the rectangle, 5 triangle, and 6 a diamond. So according to this, her age should be a 6-year-old. But I know that she's roughly around 5 to 5.5. So she is advanced in her figures, but that could be because of the opportunity and the home stimulation that she receives. Now, the other kind of examination that you can do is using a form board, and this is the simplest form board in which you have a triangle, a circle, and a square. So what you need to do is not just whether the child can do it or not, you need to observe the way the child is doing it. Is the child looking at the shapes before putting it in the slot? Does he place it properly and accurately, directly, or does he just kind of push it in by trial and error? Then if he can do it correctly while placing it, if you reverse the board, can he still do it? And by the age of 2 years, and by the age of 2 years, the child should be able to place all 3 figures in the correct slots even after you have rotated it. And you can see here in the other form boards that as the child grows older, the shapes become a little more complex, and accordingly you can see the age. Then you have the color and sizes. So you need to know how many colors the child can identify when asked. So when identify means that you say that, show me the blue color, and he points at blue. So he has identified it. And if you ask him, ki, ye kya hai? What is this? And the child says blue, then he has named it. So here the concepts are identification versus naming. Identification is if he points to the color that you have named, and name is he answers the correct name of the color when you are asking the child. So matching, grouping, small, large, these are the things that can be used. And again, we come to that young gentleman, and let's see what he can do over here. And I want you to observe me all your observations.
What color is this? What color is this? What color is this? What color is this, Rudvik? Dalu? What color is this?
So what did you see? So this is multitasking. Apart from the colors, certain other very salient features came out over here. So let's see whether your observations match mine.
What color is this?
So he could identify 5 colors.
What color is this?
That was clear enough. In addition, he had an issue. He had a problem with the size. The ring stacker the size was not appropriate. He asked for his mother help, so that was social interaction. He smiled at his mom. He sought help, and she, being a good mom, did not provide it. And he solved the problem without the help of the mother. So that's cognition. And language, I hope he used Nietzsche, so preposition, short sentences, comprehension, and expression both. So this is when you're simultaneously assessing various domains at the same time. Then you have draw a man, a person. You have the good enough Harris test and the Gessel's incomplete test. And then picture books. In picture books, you look at the quality of page turning, whether he can identify and name pictures. And if the child is older, can she tell a story from looking at the picture? And this is the typical milestones are seen in speech, language, and communication. And I want all of you to go back home today and look up the difference between speech, language, and communication. They are not synonyms, they're different. And if you know it, great. And if you don't, please look it up. That's your homework. So you need to look at the expressive speech, which means that expressive language, what the child is saying. You need to look at the receptive speech, which means the kind of what the child understands when somebody is speaking to him. And you have to look at the use as well as understanding of non-verbal communication or gestures. And these are the expected milestones which you need to know by heart so that you can arrive at the developmental age and language. Now, how do you assess the language in an infant? It's the same thing. For comprehension, you note the child's response when you talk with the child. You see that if you name a common object, does the child look at it? If you give him a simple direction like give it to me, does he follow it? And you have to be careful that when you're giving a direction, you're not supposed to use a gesture because the child might understand the gesture and not the words. You have to see how the child responds when he's being read to. For expressive language, listen to the type and frequency of the sounds and words that he's making spontaneously as well as when you are talking with him. Non-verbal communication, whether he understands your gestures and what kind of gestures does he use. If suppose you point at something, my favorite thing is that pankha kaha hai and can he point? So that is something that needs to be assessed. And what are the abnormal responses? For comprehension, not looking at the person talking to him by 6 months, not responding to his name by 12 months, in expressive vocalizing at 3 months, no babbling by 10 months, non-verbal communication, no pointing or using gestures by 12 months. And I'd like you to look at this 10-monther who's in her mother's lap. Yeah.
Dr. Sharmila?
Yes, Dr. Anju?
You've been asked to summarize because it is almost 10. So you can wind up the whole thing.
I need another 10 minutes or so.
It's okay with me, but Dr. Kaushik said, if it is okay,
no, ma'am, it's okay.
Is it okay? Can we go on?
It's okay, ma'am. It's okay.
I think we all are learning a lot. So let's go on.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
If it's okay, then I'll continue. Okay, so
Dr.
I'd
Sharma,
like you to look at,
continue for another 10-15 minutes.
yeah, sure. Just look at this this video and tell me what you see. The mother is shaking her, calling her, and it's a 10-monther. The way a normal 10-monther should look at the mother, respond, reciprocal vocalization, nothing is there. So these are the typical expressive language milestones, which are seen from a 1 year to a 5 year, starting from 1 or 2 words with meaning, increasing vocabulary, joining of sentences in 2 words and 3 words, using of nouns, nursery rhymes, telling a simple story, etc. Again, you need to know these by heart so that you can arrive at a clinical developmental age. It's very important to remember that development of language is influenced by the amount of stimulation that the child receives at home. How much is the child being spoken to? How much is he being read to? Now, in a 1 to 5 year old child, it's a similar process. You're giving him common household items, toys, picture books. And again, you're looking at identification. Where is the ball? Give me the ball, show me the ball. So the child will give you the ball so you know that he can identify. And if you ask, what is this? Then he's naming it, that is naming. And higher understanding, higher levels of understanding is if you say, give him a comb and you say that, what is the thing that you use to fix your hair? And the child says comb, that means he knows the use of the object. So similarly, you can ask about body parts, colors, size, numbers, whether he understands upper, niche, inside, outside, action pictures, can he understand sleeping, lying, running, following instructions, 1-step instruction, give me the towel, 2-step, give me the towel and the soap, 3-step, give me the towel and the soap, and then go and to the bathroom. So how many step instructions can the child understand? And in an older child, whether he can tell a story from a picture, whether you ask him things like open-end questions like, tell me about your school, or a concept, like you ask him that, okay, Saransh is your best friend. Why is he your best friend? Why do you like him so much? If he can answer those kind of questions by the age of 5, it's great. So basically, you're looking at speech, clarity, and fluency. You're looking at the type of words that he's using, nouns, prepositions, etc. And if the grammar is correct, non-verbal communication, contact, gestures, facial expressions. If there's any abnormal language like echolalia and jargon beyond that expected, and the social use of language like conversation. And if there are no clear words by 18 months, unable to show common objects or follow simple requests, not joining words by 30 months, not following what and why questions, speech is unclear at 4, or he gets extremely frustrated when he is trying to talk. And if there's any loss of language skills, then these are definitely abnormal or atypical. So the typical development, now we come to the social domain. In infants, you're looking at social responsiveness and anticipation, social recognition of mother, pleasure, displeasure, the type of play, whether it's exploratory, whether it's social, peekaboo, whether it's cause and effect, developing joint attention, following another point, using, so if you want something and you point for it, ki, I want that, that is proto-imperative pointing. And if you see something that you like and you want to show it with something, like suppose the child sees an aeroplane in the sky and he shows it to his mother. He's not asking for the aeroplane, he's showing it, he's showing his interest. That is proto-declarative pointing. So these are the 2 points that you need to know as a postgraduate. What is proto-imperative, asking, and proto-declarative, showing interest. Social reference is also something that a 12-monther shows, that if a child is faced with a new experience, like somebody comes and gives the child something, before the child takes it, he will always look at the mother for a moment, just for reassurance. Is it okay if I take it? And the mother smiles or nods, and the child will take it. This is called social referencing, and it's a very important social milestone that comes at around 12 months. So how do you assess the social skills? It's also the play in an infant. Observe what the child is doing with you, how he's interacting with his parents and other children in the clinic. You can offer him toys and a mirror if the mother doesn't have any objections. Look at how he initiates play, how he responds to playing with you. And this is a young child of around 6 months. So you can see here, this is kind of exploratory play. He's manipulating the box and he's pulling this thing, but it's kind of random. It's not with a lot of purpose. And over here in the second video, you can see that there is a plate over here. And when the child starts seeing his reflection like a mirror, then he starts banging it. So banging with the mirror is another important milestone in the social thing. So for social interaction, you need to look at the initiation, response, alertness, imitation, eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures. And over here, we come back to this good girl. This is how you try to get the child to imitate. And she's banging, but she's kind of not completely imitating. Then you have peekaboo. So here the child is laughing, and when she becomes a little older, she'll start also getting involved and asking the mother to repeat it. And over here, this child, we can't see the, okay, over here what we're showing is joint attention. The mother points to something on the ceiling and the child also looks in that direction. So abnormalities, no social smile by 3 months, no pleasure disclosure by 8 months, lack of interest in social games, no joint attention by 12 months, poor eye contact or gaze avoidance, a monotonous facial expression, no strange anxiety or excessive familiarity. All these are abnormal in an infant. And look at this video, and the elder sibling is trying to play with the younger sibling, and see how the child, the younger one is not looking at the elder one at all, is completely absorbed in its own repetitive movements. See, there's nothing, not even looking at the sister. So in a 1 to 5 year old, now what we're going to look at is the kind of toys that the child uses. The cause and effect toys is like those musical toys. You press a button and the light comes out or music comes. Mimicking familiar acts. Parallel play is when two kids sit next to each other and they're not really interacting, but they're playing with the same thing. Then pull and push toys is when you're dragging something or you're pulling a perambulator or pushing a perambulator. Pretend plays comes at around 2. Turn taking and tricycle, the 3. Cooperative play with the peer group comes around 4, which gradually transitions to group play and role plays. So play itself is a very important thing to assess and is something that we usually kind of neglect to ask about when we're taking the developmental history. So how do we assess the social and play skills? You can have an unstructured play session in your setting in the hospital or the OPD, but it's more helpful to have home videos. You need to use developmentally appropriate toys, the ones that I just described. Toys that a child can use by himself. Activities and games that a child uses with other children, bubble blowing, balloon, ball games. You need to observe the communication and social interaction, observe whether the sophistication of the pretend play and role play, and whether there is turn taking. So these are the abnormalities in social and play skills: lack of joint attention, pretend play, repetitive play, a lack of interest in others, ignoring others, or too friendly, preferring solitary play, minimal recognition of others' happiness or distress. These are all abnormal, atypical social and play behavior. So this is the example of a similar age child. All of them have a bat, and just see the difference. So this was completely purposeful. He has one issue in mind, that I need to hit that ball with the bat. Look at this one. This is again, I'm trying to emphasize the quality of what the child is doing. So it's less purposeful.
तो मुझे हाथ में दो, लो मैं मारूंगी. चलो वहाँ खड़े हो, वहाँ खड़े हो, वहाँ खड़े हो पहले.
Not really following or getting involved in the game.
ये लो, ये लो.
And here I don't think you're able to see it. Over here, basically this child ends up with using the bat, and here banging herself with it. So you can see here, all three children have a bat and they're playing, so-called playing with the bat. And this is why I want to emphasize this, because that's why we need home videos, because in each child, in each video, the mother will say कि ये bat ball से खेलता है. But in number 2 and number 3, bat ball से ठीक तरह से they're not playing properly with the bat and the ball. So it's important to see the quality of play again. Now we come to cognition, which is a total overlap of everything that we've done: language, social, fine motor. And it's in a slightly older child, in addition to all these things, there's integration now with psychological aspects like attention, motivation, social, cognition, and emotional regulation. Now, how do we assess in an infant? Same, you can use a cube, we use the pellet, we use shapes, whether they can be put into a container or not. You can give him an object with a string and finding a hidden toy, and giving an object and seeing whether they can use it appropriately on the self or the doll. So let's just look at. So this is a string. So the mother is pulling the toy with a string and the child is looking at it. Now she's interested, she wants to do the same thing and she's doing it. So that is pulling a toy with a string. She has the ability to understand that if I pull this, now finding a hidden toy. And there you are. She's got it. So these are the very simple things that you can do to see where the cognition of the infant. And if they're not looking for toys, no interest, no purposeful use of objects, not defining objects by their use, these are all abnormalities in cognition in an infant. And in an older child, we've already gone through this: cubes, paper and pen, picture book, body parts, color, draw a man. According to the age, there are various abilities and you need to know these, or you need to know the reference for these so that you can see the level of cognition. So now that we've finished so far we covered the gross motor domain, the fine motor domain, the social domain, the language domain, and an overlapping cognition. Besides this, you need to assess vision and hearing in all children. So for vision, you inspect the squint, nystagmus, abnormal movement, response when you occlude one eye. And if the child gets distressed on either this or in that, that means the dominant eye is, if the dominant eye gets covered, the child will show distress. So that's an indirect way of saying that there's a problem. You need to examine the pupillary reflexes, the red reflex, the ocular motility. And in an infant, you can bring a dangling object slowly and look for an age-appropriate response. So over here, I would like you to look at this video and see what the response is to a dangling object. And match it with the responses over here. So he's moved from one to the other side. So that matches a 3-monther following from side to side 180 degrees. And you should also check whether he follows vertically or not, which I haven't done. And at 6 months, he adjusts the position to visualize it. But it's very important to remember that all children have to have a visual acuity screen at 6 months and annually thereafter. And a bedside visual assessment is very, very crude and may not give you reliable information. So irrespective if a child has developmental delay, you must get a structured formal visual behavior. A clinical bedside assessment is not enough. These are the certain visual acuity assessment tools that are used in older children, which are usually used in ophtha OPD and not in the clinical bedside. So I'm not going to go into the details of this. For hearing in a 0 to 3 month child, you can produce a sound by either crushing paper or ringing a bell or speaking at a conversational tone, 50 centimeters out of sight, and look at the response. The response can be either crying, startling, quietening, or blinking. And this is the Murphy sequence, which is basically you're again producing sound around 18 inches away from the level of the ear. And you look at how the child turns to the production of the sound. So you're going to first do it at the level of the ear. You have to be out of sight. So from the back at the level, then upward, and then, then downward, and then upward. So, and you see the way the child moves his head. So at the sound at 3 months, the child will turn his head to the side. At 3 to 4, he's going to turn his head and his eyes to the side. If it's at 5 to 6 and it's from below, he's going to turn his head to the side and then look down. And from above, he'll turn his head to the side and then look above. Then he's going to, as the child becomes older, 6 to 8, he's going to turn his, and you're doing it from above, he'll turn in an arc. And then around 9 months, it's going to be directly and diagonally, one swift action. And by 12 months, the hearing is as good as an adult. So the clinical bedside way, the whisper conversation at various distances will be the similar. So again, you have to have a formal hearing screening evaluation if you have any concerns or if there are any high risk factors for hearing impairment, because again, a bedside assessment of hearing is very crude and not reliable. Now look at this little girl and see how this child responds to the hearing stimulus. So did you see? She produced the sound from the back. The child was unaware and she immediately went diagonally. So that means 8 to 9 months of age. So now comes the last part, how to synthesize your findings. Now remember, inability to perform a skill may not just be because of a delay or some pathological problem. It could be simply because the child is not motivated, or he's anxious, or he's hungry or sleepy, or the environment is not conducive. He's feeling uncomfortable, he's sweaty, he's feeling hot, or there are distractions. So that may be one reason why the child is not performing. So you need to look into those, and a single clinical examination is not enough. A single clinical examination is basically reflecting the status of the development on that day when you have done the examination. So an isolated examination findings have no relevance whatsoever. What you need to do is that you need to document all your findings, and you need to document them according to the domain, the way I showed you in the one like I had made that table. So similarly, you can write gross motor, this is a description, and according to whatever the child is doing gross motor, this is the expected developmental age. Similarly, the same process you repeat for fine motor, then social, then language and cognition, vision and hearing. And these information, these findings have to be integrated with all the clinical clues and information, salient information that you have already derived from the history that you have taken and from the examination, the general physical examination, the anthropometry, the dysmorphism, the systemic findings, your neurological findings, the risk factors, the functional impairment, the home environment, and the previous developmental trajectory that the child has had from the beginning. All of these have to be taken into consideration to bring it up and synthesize your findings to arrive at the clinical diagnosis. Now, the clinical diagnosis after a developmental examination will be two types. You look at the clinical behavioral phenotype and the developmental pattern. Again, I'm coming to the developmental pattern. Remember, for the third time, predominantly gross motor impairment, motor delay, predominantly speech and language delay, global developmental delay with 2 or more domains, and within global developmental delay, whether there's an even pattern, which means all the domains that are affected are equally delayed, or there is an uneven pattern, which means that there is more delay in one domain with respect to the other. So all these things you need to see that is it fitting into a specific neurodevelopmental delay? Is it fitting into a specific neurodevelopmental disorder like global developmental delay, which proceeds into intellectual disability, or an autism spectrum disorder, or a child who will eventually have ADHD or dyslexia. So these are specific neurodevelopmental delays, disorders. Or the second entity, which is not a specific neurodevelopmental disorder, but there is significant delay in more than one domain. And what do we mean by significant delay? Significant delay is, there are 4 subtypes. One is if there is severe delay in any domain, which means that the developmental age is less than 50% of the chronological age as the difference between what you are observed and the expected for that age of the child. The second is if there's moderate to mild delay in 2 or more domains. So the delay is not severe, but more domains are affected. The third is when there is functional impairment in communication, movement, coordination, and learning. And the fourth is when there's plateauing or regression. So in these conditions, a specific neurodevelopmental disorder or neurodevelopmental, some developmental problem which is leading to significant delay as defined will warrant in-depth evaluation and planning and consultation with an expert. So to conclude, the key messages from this session is that developmental examination is a critical component of both developmental assessment as well as an extended neurological examination. It's a must-known area or essential competency for all pediatric residents and also for DM residents who are doing neonatology, because their NICU graduates are going to come for follow-up. An examination should be done in a child-friendly area with no distractions. The child should be comfortable and not sick. And don't get stressed out if the child does not perform, because if you get stressed out and get cranky, then the child is still not going to perform and he'll end up crying, and the examiner will feel that you're not, that there are problems with the way you're communicating and your attitude. So not getting a motor skill should not unnerve you. Use a systematic approach covering the examination of all domains and the sensory fields according to the age of the child, the way we just covered in the last 1 hour or so. Synthesize all the clinical information, which means all the information that you have from your history and your examination, as well as your developmental examination. Look at it holistically, and try to arrive at a clinical diagnosis and an ecological diagnosis that fits your clinical diagnosis. If you're unsure, do not label, consult with an expert. And even if you don't have a diagnosis, it does not matter. You must start with an early intervention, because we cannot lose that window of opportunity, and monitor progress. So I end my session here. Thank you so much for being a patient audience. I apologize for the glitch. It started raining, so I was cut off. I again thank the Academy of Child Neurology and the office bearers, and a lot of thanks and gratitude to the parents and their kids who gave me permission to use the videos in this presentation. And over to Dr. Anju.
Well, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Sharmila for making such a difficult topic in a way and presenting it so well. It was very relevant for the postgraduates, and I got so many messages saying that you should continue the lecture. And there are a number of questions they have asked, and they have asked to repeat so many things. I think we should have a next lecture on autistic features, which a lot of people are confused with. So she has pointed out very well that psychometric tests have to be done by a trained person, then tone abnormalities may be transient, then red flag signs in all the domains have been shown very well. Secondly, we always miss out on examination of the eye, examination of the ear. So that is very important. So Dr. Sharmila, could you recommend any book for them? For the postgraduate?
For the postgrads, you will need to look at various sources.
Yes.
Nelson, obviously, you have the full Ellingworth, Nelson, even Ghai for that matter, even Ghai. Dr. Piyush Gupta's clinical textbook. I mean, there are bits and pieces everywhere. But I'll just, do I have many?
But initially, when you start with the pediatrics, something like Illingworth, if you read from first page to the last page, you get an idea what all is it about. Next,
Definitely.
everything you have to be chipped in, like Dr. Sharmila said. So there is one person who's constantly asking, what is the use of reversal of foam board?
Reversal of the foam board. Okay, why do you need to reverse it?
Yeah.
It's a part of the process. It's kind of cross-checking that the child has not done it by. It's basically you're increasing the, you're making it tougher for the kid. So you know for sure that yes, she knows what a circle is and that the circle goes over here. And if it's a triangle, even if the apex is now facing the other direction, she can use her visual spatial perception and change the direction of the triangle so that the base is now on the other side and the apex is on the other side. So that is why it's just making it more difficult. And it's, I mean, a 2-year-old can do it. That's amazing.
And a lot of people want to clarify again what is about copy, imitate, and perform. Though you clarified it quite well. And another demand is about the slide of fine motor milestones, red flag signs. If you can put
Please,
project that
okay,
slide.
okay. First, I'd like to clarify one thing, that red flag signs are signs which come in developmental milestones, which give you an indicator that there may be a delay. And here, what I was putting in red are not actually red flag signs. These are the abnormalities. So red flag is when you're thinking that there may be a problem. It's like a screening. In screening, it may be a problem. And these things that were in red to just highlight that these are abnormalities. Okay. So, sorry, ma'am, what was the second question?
They just wanted to see the slide of red flags. That's all. And if you could tell them again what is copy, imitate, and perform,
Okay.
which
Okay.
I think you told very well.
Okay, so now if suppose I draw a line and I show the child that I'm drawing this line, okay, I won't say it. I'll go back to that picture. One sec. Now over here in this paper, this rectangle is already made. This rectangle has not been made in front of this child. Now, if the rectangle is already made and I say make this, and she makes another rectangle here just by looking at this drawn figure, that is copying. Now, if I make the triangle, like with my cursor or my pen, I make a triangle right in front of her and she sees the process that we make a line, start from here, make a line, another, third and fourth, and she copies the way I have done it because I have demonstrated it to her, then that is imitation. She's imitating what I've done. And if I tell her, draw a rectangle without showing her or without giving her a model to copy from, then that is performing. So they're basically increasing levels of difficulty. You're showing something and she's copying that. You've made something and she's copying that. And you've said make a rectangle and she makes a rectangle using her own memory, using her own recall, using her own executive function. So that is how it proceeds. I hope it's now understood. And regarding the red, the abnormalities, this presentation is going to be uploaded to the AOCN website. So you'll be able to access it from there and you can look at them at your own leisure.
Okay. So they were asking whether the videos will be available or there or not.
The videos will not, you can't download the videos, but since it's a recording, whatever has been played during the session, you will be able to visualize it from the recording.
So the most of the participants, you can go through their lecture again. That would be very good. There's a special comment from Dr. Dimple. If we had a teacher like Dr. Sharmila teaching us development, it would have been very good. The time with ND. So on that note, I'll hand over to Dr. Kaushik.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Anju and Dr. Sharmila, for chairing the session and speaking on the interesting topic. And we thank from the organization, sincere thanks to Dr. Anju and Dr. Sharmila for sparing your valuable time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.